All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar discussing the most recent protests in Iran and specifically the bloody crackdown that suppressed them, that we're gaining more details about just how bad it was, as well as where we go from here going forward, both what the situation on the ground in Iran is and the options facing the United States in terms of a response and what that response might look like. I'm Blaise Mishtal, JINSA's Vice President for Policy. I'm delighted to be joined this afternoon by Mehdi Parpanchi, the Executive Editor of Iran International, the media outlet that I think has had some of the best, most detailed and fascinating coverage of Iran generally, but specifically these protests over the past couple of weeks, as well as John Hanna, my colleague, and the Randi and Charles Wax Senior Fellow here at JINSA. Mehdi and John, thank you both so much for being with us. Uh, Mehdi, maybe I could start with you because Iran International has really been paving the way and giving us insight into what happened in Iran over the past couple of weeks of protests. And specifically, when other outlets are reporting death figures of around 4,000, I think Iran International has suggested the real toll of these protests has been much higher. So I'd be really interested to hear from you both what Iran International has learned and what other details you can share about what actually happened on the ground in Iran, particularly in those first 2 weeks of January.
Thank you so much for having me, Blaise. I'll try to be brief, but if there are any more questions, then we can go in details. The massacre itself, I guess most of your audience would know, happened exactly 3 weeks ago today. Within 2 days, most of it was on Friday. I think it was Friday, 9th of January, if I'm not wrong. Yes, 9th of January. So there were protests before that for about 2 weeks, and mostly in Bazaar, Tehran's Bazaar, basically the traditional market. And it was because of the economic situation and also the fall of Iran's currency, rial, as your audience would know, it's been falling very sharply, the value of rial against dollar. So the protest started from there, but it immediately gained traction in many other cities as well, including Tehran. But it was concentrated in Tehran's Bazaar most of the times. And it very quickly turned to basically political protests with the slogans that people were chanting, and vast majority of them were in support of Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi, who resides in U.S. And there were many people basically doubting about it. In the beginning, some people were saying that these are voiced over, videos and stuff like that. But the truth of the matter was that people were chanting in support of him. It continued until Reza Pahlavi called for 2 days of protest at 8 p.m. Tehran time, Thursday and Friday, 8th and 9th of January. Most people, or I would really say that I couldn't find anybody who were predicting how it will be received on the ground in Iran. When it happened, it caught everyone in surprise because millions of people, and this is not an exaggeration, at that time we didn't have video evidence because the internet went dark. They closed down the internet on the same day, on Thursday at 11 p.m. Tehran time. So we didn't receive that much of videos. But in the past week, the internet has become not normal, but it is working for some people. So we have received plenty of email and video clips, visual evidence of the number of people, which shows those videos in various cities in Tehran and other cities. According to the official figure from the Interior Ministry of Iran, 400 cities, basically, that the protest happened on those 2 days. And the massacre started on Thursday evening and Friday all day, basically. So how many people got killed is very difficult to verify it. When we issued our first editorial board statement, it was 3 days after the massacre. As you mentioned, the numbers were, some outlets were reporting a few hundreds, some a few thousands, 2,000, 3,000, but nobody really believed what has happened on those days. 3 days after the massacre, the statement that we issued, we reported 12,000 deaths. It was unbelievable. It was unbelievable for us as well, but that was not an estimate. It was the number did not come from our own, observations or estimates. It came from the Interior Ministry and Presidential Office, and also the Security Council, the one that Ali Larijani basically is its head. At that time, we noticed that something extraordinary happened in Iran because we don't have contacts in those offices. People were reaching us to leak the information. And the 12,000 was the number which was reported by IRGC's intelligence section to the Security Council, that 12,000 have been killed. But again, that was an estimate. They didn't have the exact number, or that's what we believe. 2 weeks after that, after the massacre, we issued our second editorial board statement, and in that we reported 36,500. Again, that number is not our figure. Basically, again, that comes from the leaks from inside Iran, specifically from the Security Council. I think as we are speaking, nobody really has any doubt about that thousands of people have been killed. My own very cautious estimate will be somewhere between 30,000 and 40,000. Although, as I said, that number comes from the Security Council of Iran, 36,500. We had other figures. I will ask your audience to read our second editorial board statement, because we explained in detail the numbers that we had from. One of them was from the Security and Foreign Affairs Committee of the Iranian Majlis, basically Iran's parliament. There was another one from the Presidential Office, and the other one from the Security Council. Each one of them were slightly different. One was saying 32, the other one 30, the other one 36. But what is important is to know that those reports were from different days. Each one were like 3 days apart, 4 days apart from each other. And we had all of them, and we gave basically detailed numbers in our statement. So in a nutshell, that's basically what has happened. And the numbers that I just want to reemphasize, that those numbers were not our estimate, they were leaks. And again, it shows that what has happened was so extraordinary that even some people inside the system thought that they have to leak the truth, and they have to talk.
Those are truly staggering and heartbreaking numbers. Do you have any sense, Mehdi, were the deaths sort of spread out across all of the 400 cities where protests were seen in Iran? Or were they concentrated in just a couple of cities? What is the pattern?
It was everywhere, but different cities had different death toll, depend on the intensity of the basically clashes. Some of the cities like Mashhad, Rasht, Tehran, Isfahan, they had very high death toll. For instance, again, in our statement, we have mentioned the numbers that we had. For Mashhad, it was 1,800. I think it was around the same time that New Yorker had a very good report. They reported for Mashhad 2,000, as far as I remember, but the figure which we had was 1,800. I'm not saying their number was not correct. I'm just saying that, the numbers that we had. In Rasht, again, Tehran, Isfahan, the death toll is, amounts to thousands. In some of the cities, it's like 40, 60, depending on how, the big cities, the small cities, but it has been across the country. Everywhere, they had to kill people to send people to home. We have information now that the basically they've been ordered to put an end. There was a specific order from Khamenei's office. As you know, Khamenei is the head of the armed forces. So Khamenei has an obsession with color revolutions. I mean, even if you read his speeches throughout the past 2 decades, he has mentioned it many, many times. And he has a fear, probably rightly so, that he sees it as a kind of a existential threat for the Islamic Republic, that if something like that has happened, could happen. And the information that we have is that there was a specific order that they must put an end to this kind of protests. So the protests were, peaceful protests, but they started killing people indiscriminately just to send everybody home and also create a climate of fear for the people that they shouldn't come back again. That's the conclusion that we have for now.
And I mean, there have been other protests in the history of the Islamic Republic. Is this level of violence sort of in keeping with what you've seen in previous protests, or is it unusual?
Never in Iran we ever had anything like this before or after the revolution. Definitely in the Islamic Republic's 47 years of reign, we never had anything even close to this. There was a massacre in prisons in 1987, if I'm not wrong. That the figure was about 3,000, but that was executions in prisons. In the past years, we had 4 rounds of protests. One was about 4 years ago, if I'm not wrong. It took about 10 days, and the official figure was 36, but we believe that it was about 50 people which was killed in a span of 10 days. The second round came a year later. You would remember when the price of fuel was basically tripled overnight, and everywhere in most cities, almost everywhere in the country, there was unrest. In that one, Reuters reported 1,500. However, organizations like Amnesty International and other human rights organizations managed to put together 365, something like that. But whichever you believe, it was about hundreds. Again, a year after that, there was another round of protests, Women, Life, Freedom. It took about 6 months, but there were people who got killed in a span of 4 months. Again, the figure is about 560 people. So we never had anything like this before. We are talking about thousands of people, tens of thousands of people in 2 days. This has never happened in Iran's history, neither before nor after the revolution. One thing that your audience, I guess, may find interesting is that before the revolution, during Shah's time, the revolution, the seeds of it started about 12 years before 1979, when Khomeini was basically exiled from Qom. That was the beginning of the revolution, if you like. And we are talking about some 12, 13 years. According to the official figures of the Islamic Republic itself, this is not my number. These are, there's a foundation of martyrs in Iran, Bunyad Shahid. They have their official figures and the lists. So within that over a decade, which ended by the toppling of the Shah's regime, everyone which was killed, including executions in prisons, the protests, everything, it's 3,164 people, which led to the basically the Islamic Revolution, and Shah left the country. The number is 3,164 in a span of more than a decade. Now we are talking about tens of thousands of people in 2 days. This has never happened in Iran's history, and I believe neither in the world history. I don't remember a street protest in 2 days, any death toll like 30,000. I have never seen it. Maybe you would know, but I believe that is unprecedented.
Hmm. One more question for you, Mehdi, and then I want to bring in John. But do we know who perpetrated these horrible massacres? Was it IRGC? Was it Basij? Was it Iranian proxies brought in from Iraq? Who was the regime relying on to pull the trigger and kill these protesters?
Mostly IRGC. In Tehran, Sarallah headquarters is basically the main organization, if you like, which is responsible for the massacre. And there are other headquarters around the country. Each one of those headquarters is responsible for some of them for one province, some for 2 or 3 provinces, depending on how big those provinces are. But the main body which is responsible for it is IRGC. However, we have credible reports that they have used their proxies, mostly Iraqi proxies. We received a report yesterday that there were some Chechen fighters among them, even from Sudan. But the main organization which is responsible for it is IRGC. I mean, the number of the people that they have deployed to the streets cannot be any foreign force. Yes, they have used Iraqi proxies, but nobody can say that those were responsible for this type of a massacre when we are talking about tens of thousands of people. The main responsibility falls on IRGC and Basij.
Hmm. So, John, would be interested to get your insights here about what this tells us about the Iranian regime, that they were willing to turn to such ferocity and savagery to make the streets of Tehran and Mashhad and Rasht run red with blood. What does that tell us about the regime, the mindset of the supreme leader? Is it a sign of weakness? Is it a sign of strength that they're able to get their security forces to keep pulling the trigger tens of thousands of times? What's the takeaway?
Yeah, it's a good question, Blaze. I think you could see evidence of both. I think fundamentally it's evidence of weakness and the regime's knowledge and internal sense that the stakes now really are existential, that this crisis that they've engineered for Iran in terms of the country's economic collapse, in terms of its international isolation, the defeat of its entire regional strategy over the last couple of years, primarily at the hands of Israel, the dismantling of its proxy network, the attacks during the 12-day war that neutralized a good chunk of the nuclear program, some of the missile program. The Islamic Republic really has now come to a dead end, a process that's been underway for a couple of decades. I think this is a sign that it's reaching its culmination because the regime really has no answers other than to start engaging in this kind of slaughter on a scale, as Mehdi says, that we've never ever seen before, despite a lot of protests over the last 15 years. This is on a completely different scale, and I think it's a sign that the regime really knows that it's perhaps approaching a real climactic point in its ability to survive. On the other hand, as you say, the fact that you can give in an order to Iranians and Iranian forces and troops to engage in this kind of mass slaughter on the orders of the supreme leader to kill essentially as many people as they could. And again, as I think Matthew's right, it's, you rack your brain and you can't find a historical precedent in terms of people going out in the street in civil protests against a government and being mowed down in this way. Your memory only reaches back to things like the Holocaust and the Hudson Group and making their ways through Eastern Europe and slaughtering Jews and throwing them into mass graves at places like Babi Yar. But other than that, it's this is really quite unique, and but I'd be interested in what Mehdi has to say about what is the state of the security forces of the IRGC and besieged now that the regime called, Khamenei ordered, and they were prepared to mow down these people in these kinds of numbers because it does go to the issue. The regime may be at a dead end, but it still looks like it's been able to hold together coherently, particularly the people with the guns. We don't see any real serious evidence of cracks, and at least on the outside, in terms of these either the elite or the security forces, other than these examples of these very damaging leaks that Mehdi suggests are coming from inside the system. Maybe that's something that we need to work much harder on in exploiting that kind of discontent. But for the moment, it does look like the regime has succeeded in silencing these forces for the moment. But you can't imagine that it could be for very long, given the nature of the fundamental nature of the crisis the regime is in now.
Yeah, Mehdi would be interested to get your thoughts on that question as well. What is the status of the regime, of cohesion, of the loyalty of the security forces? It's clearly there are those who have grave doubts if they're leaking the information to you. But do you see that discontent potentially spreading throughout the regime?
Uh, we will see. I think we can put what happened 3 weeks ago in a historical context, and then I will get back to your question. John mentioned it rightly. I want to second him basically. 16th of September 2022, Mahsa Amini was killed. And then we had Women Life Freedom Movement, which everybody would remember. That's about 3 years and a couple of months, almost 3 years now. In the past 3 years, the Islamic Republic has experienced 5 major defeats. And I think it's worth mentioning every one of them. One of them was hijab. Hijab is almost gone. They are not able to enforce the mandatory hijab anymore. The images which come out from the country and the eyewitness, we are in contact with Iran every day. Hijab is gone. Nobody is able to enforce hijab. And it is important to understand that hijab was an ideological, it was like a Berlin Wall for the Islamic Republic. It was not about just a veil on the head. It was how the Islamic Republic's apparatus was enforcing its will on people and on their, lifestyle. They couldn't continue doing it anymore. That was massive. Khamenei himself 3 times after that has basically mentioned that hijab must come back, but they didn't manage to do that. And I don't want to go into details, but I want to, your audience to understand that when they lost the ability to enforce hijab, that was a massive setback for the Islamic Republic. The second one came when they had to leave Syria. Losing Syria was like an Afghanistan moment for the Islamic Republic. What happened for Soviet Union after leaving Afghanistan, this was in a scale something like that. They lost their narrative of the strategic depths. They have been ruling on it, and they have been emphasizing for the past decade that Iran now has 4 major capitals in the Middle East, the Shia Crescent, the strategic depths. They created a narrative around it, and it was a projection of power. They were saying that now we have access to the warm waters of Mediterranean Sea. Iran rules from, Tehran to Beirut. Everywhere is under our control. And they were right. But they lost it after, the October 7, and we saw what happened after that. Nasrallah got killed, of course, before Syria, and the Hezbollah is seriously degraded. They don't have the ability that they used to enjoy anymore. So that was another massive setback. And I want to emphasize that, when you look at the history of the wars around the world, many political systems collapsed after they were defeated in a major war. And Syria for Iran was such an experience, basically. 12-day war, another one. They invested billions and billions of dollars on Iran's nuclear program. It was, if not destroyed altogether, but we all agree that it was damaged seriously. And that was another narrative, that they were saying that this is a deterrence for us. Nobody can touch Iran because now we have a nuclear program, so on and so forth. And then we saw that it was gone overnight. All of these was basically, it was eroding, or it was an erosion of the power inside the country as well. People feel empowered after, as I said, hijab, which lasts for 4 decades in Iran, and then people managed. It was the first time, Women Life Freedom movement was the first time that people won the race, if you like, against the state. And then came Syria moment, and then came 12-day war. All of these are, it's not just for the people, the system itself sees that there is a domino of defeats, and everyone is coming after the other one, and they are, the damage that each one, the Islamic Republic is experiencing, when comes the next wave, the damage even becomes, more and more. There's another thing that happened in the past months, or, so I would say, is that in the past 47 years, Islamic Republic's main effort, their main mission was to prevent any political figure or any political group to be seen as an alternative to the Iranian regime. Basically, they established themselves as the only force, as the only power, as the only people who can manage Iran, and as if there is no one else. It's Islamic Republic, and that's it. They closed, the political system that Iran has, the election system and everything, everybody would know that it's a very closed system. It's impossible to penetrate through the election and anything else. And they have also had crackdown inside the country for any political dissent have always been, crushed, either executions or prisons. They have even killed opposition figures outside the country. There are plenty of reports in Germany, in France, in many other European countries. They have killed anyone who got even closer to be seen as a credible alternative. But now, Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi is emerging as an alternative inside Iran. Some people may disagree with it, but what we saw in Iran 3 weeks ago, there was a call and millions of people answered. So I think that in itself shows that there is a good base for him. So that's another defeat for the Islamic Republic. And it makes it basically we had hijab, Syria, 12 days war, and also a serious alternative being emerged. The fifth one is what we witnessed again 3 weeks ago. When a regime kills, tens of thousands of people in 48 hours, that, as John mentioned rightly, that shows weakness. It's not showing strength. That's not power. That's weakness. When you have to kill people to send them home. Yes, you can say that there is. We don't see a crack on the IRGC, for instance. They are still killing people, but IRGC members have families. Many of those, people who are killing people outside, in the streets, they have kids. They have young kids which don't subscribe to the ideology of the regime. The best thing that proves it is that thousands of, the sons and daughters of Islamic Republic regimes, basically, sons and daughters, the officials, they live in Europe. Some of them, many of them, hundreds of them live in United States. If they liked what is happening in Iran, basically, if they were subscribed to the regime that their fathers have established and is running, they would have stayed inside the country. So they will be under pressure. I don't think the Islamic Republic, with or without foreign intervention, will be able to continue for long. I hope that was, I managed to explain what I was trying to.
Yeah, no, that I think particularly that narrative of the five major losses that the regime has suffered is really important context for us to understand. I'd also be curious if you could tell us, Mehdi, sort of what the current status of the protests is. How successful was that massacre on January 8th and 9th and 10th and driving people home? Are people still coming out to protest at all? We hear, I think there was a New York Times story just the other day about what's happening at some of the cemeteries and the funerals of the protesters. And but are there still protests going on? Is it mostly quieted down now? What is the status?
The answer is yes and no. No protests, but yes, there are protests. Those funerals now are protests. In every single one of them, again, there are plenty of footage that we receive. Hundreds, sometimes thousands of people take part in those funerals, and they are still chanting "Death to Khamenei." It is surprising to me that people are still defiant. By tradition, in those funerals, when they carry the body, they always say, La ilaha illallah, which is an Islamic phrase. You don't see any of them. People are playing music. They are dancing. There are really extraordinary images. And now that I'm describing it, it makes me emotional because we see all of these videos every day. We receive thousands of clips every day from our audience inside Iran. And for me, it is unbelievable that despite the massacre, despite the level of brutality that people have experienced in the streets, they are still defiant. So I don't think it's going anywhere. You remember I gave you the figures of the mass protests in the past 5 years. I said it started with 36 deaths, then 360, then 560, and now you have, thousands. What is that telling you? Every time there is a wave, it comes, then it is pushed back. But when it returns, it becomes even bigger. Every time they have to kill more because the protests are larger. Otherwise, they wouldn't, need to kill more people. And this one was massive. This is unprecedented. And I don't think it's going to have. It will go anywhere soon. Anyway, people will return to the streets without any doubt. I have zero doubt about it. And I don't know, is it going to be tomorrow, next week, or next month? But we need to understand that many people have been killed in provinces that they have tribal systems, like Lorestan, for instance. In those areas, first of all, people are armed. Traditionally, Lors have arms, right? Secondly, there is a tribal culture there. If you kill one, that blood is not going to go wasted. People will look for revenge. That is the culture. And I have, again, no doubt that in those places, specifically in those places, I'm not saying in Tehran there will be protests, but it will have, other shapes and forms. But specifically in those areas, in provinces that have tribal systems and also that culture, there will be revenge.
John, as you're hearing this, I wonder what the implications are for the United States, particularly at this moment where President Trump appears to be weighing what the U.S. response should be after having promised more than 2 weeks ago that help was on its way. On January 14th, he abruptly sort of changed direction. We've been waiting for the U.S. Carrier group to arrive in the Middle East. In the meantime, now it has arrived in the United States. The president appears to be weighing his options. And and some of the pushback on the U.S. taking action appears to be that the protests are over, the regime won. It's sort of too late for the U.S. to do anything. U.S. strikes aren't going to topple the regime. But what we're hearing from Mehdi is that the protests are still bubbling up. The regime has suffered all these defeats one after the other. Maybe it is weaker than it looks from the outside. How would that and how should that affect U.S. decision making about what to do next?
Yeah, well, listen, there's a couple of this sort of forces, I think, operating now on the president. One, it's just clear to me that he got way ahead of his skis when he began telling the regime on January 2nd that if they started killing, he was prepared to come to the rescue of the people, that he was locked and loaded and ready to go. He clearly was not ready to go. He then, I think, JINSA has put out at least, I can't remember if it's 7 or 8 specific threats over the course of a couple of weeks period, and setting an obvious red line that he wasn't at that time prepared to enforce because the red line got absolutely shredded on the evening of January 8th and then into the 9th, as we've heard from Mehdi. So the president, maybe out of the best of intentions, wanting to support the Iranian people, probably there were not some thousands that might have heard the president of the United States, the most powerful country in the world, promise to come to their rescue, who decided, okay, I'm going now out into the streets. I'm prepared to risk this because the United States is behind me. And a lot of those people might be dead now. So there's tremendous moral hazard here that the president has gotten into and put the reputation of the United States on the line. Now he's doubled down on that because he wasn't ready, and now he's introduced this massive force into the region with the intention, presumably, of doing something to follow through and make good on the red line that he had set, and to actually punish this regime, and to somehow help the Iranian people and to advance American interests, obviously. So he's put an awful lot of chips on the table for the United States. And for him now to walk away and do nothing, because he's not going to get the kind of deal that Steve Witkoff is proposing to the regime. There's no way that they can come close to doing what Steve Witkoff would like, nor should they, frankly, in the context of 30 to 40,000 Iranians dead in the street that the president helped call there. It would, be heaping moral abomination on top of a moral abomination to now cut a deal and get rid of sanctions and empower this regime when it's done this horrific crime to its own people. So I think the president, if you asked me that if I had to say, is he going to actually take some kind of action or not, I'd say he will. I mean, obviously the intelligence will be important. I can't imagine he's getting intelligence that says these protests are dead forever. Anybody can see from the outside, given the progression of these protests over the last 10 to 15 years, that they're growing, and the legitimacy of the regime is decreasing. Its ability to reform itself economically, politically, or otherwise, that's dead. It's weaker than it's ever been. So I think there's an opportunity here, clearly, for the United States to play a role. I'd be interested to hear Mehdi's opinion of whether, even given the events of the last few weeks, the Iranian people would still like to see the United States act against the regime in a forceful manner. I imagine a lot of them probably would, even if they do feel somewhat betrayed by the lack of action in response to the 8th or 9th. So I think there's a lot of pressure on the president to do something. His red line has been shredded. He looks a little bit like Barack Obama did in 2013 with his Syria red line. Now, the president's perfectly capable of saying, it just doesn't make sense for us to do this and to get away with it, because he has done the 12-day war. He has done the snatch of President Maduro in Venezuela. He's demonstrated American strength. So maybe he doesn't feel like he needs to do Iran to maintain his credibility and the credibility of the United States. I think he does. I think they're having climbed up this tree. I think he does need to probably act, and I think there's things that he can do. Uh, Another calculation in his head, of course, is that he likes clean wars. He doesn't like to see American casualties. He likes one and done. We go in, boom, and we get out. Uh, there's, again, the intelligence will be important. Are we going to see a repeat of the Iranian kind of performative response as they did to the Soleimani assassination in 2020, or to the 12-day war with just a handful of missiles on a base in Qatari that they warned the United States and agreed ahead of time? Or is it now so existential that they feel they need to up the ante and to take that risk of either attacking American forces, attacking infrastructure in the Gulf, oil infrastructure of our Gulf allies, or obviously going after Israel in a major way, and being willing to risk going up an escalation ladder in a way that will draw this out and keep U.S. forces engaged for a period of time with an uncertain end. We just have to see. We know in Yemen in 2025, the president engaged. I think he was told that we could defeat the Houthis relatively quickly. And within 2 months, it became, too open-ended for the president, and he quickly found an exit ramp and got out of the business of going up against the Houthis. The Iranian regime is as weak as it is. It still has, a significant arsenal, particularly on the missile front, anti-ship missiles, fast boats in the Gulf, fleet of submarines. So it's, if it wants to go down fighting, it's possible that it could, and to see whether or not President Trump really is willing to get into a more drawn out and serious conflict that could last days, weeks, even a couple of months. A lot depends on what the president is hearing and what his appetite is now for risk and how weak he thinks this regime is. I don't think, my guess is whatever he does against the regime, if and when he does, I don't think anybody can tell him it's likely to bring down the regime. That U.S. airstrikes and missile strikes are not going to be enough to bring the regime down. It's possible that they could bring some people out in the streets quicker, revive the protests. But at a minimum, I think you could punish the regime, degrade its military capabilities, missiles, naval assets, IRGC, besiege, command and control, political targets to significantly weaken the regime, dramatically ratchet up economic pressure on the regime, stopping the flow of oil to China in a much more serious way, and begin preparing and beginning to build the assets for a longer term struggle that's obviously got to be led by the Iranian people.
Thanks, John. Mehdi, one more question for you, and then I'd like to open it up to the audience for their questions. So if you are watching and you'd like to ask Mehdi or John anything, please feel free to type it in using the Q&A function in Zoom, and then I'll be happy to read it out to them. But Mehdi, John had asked whether the Iranian people would still like to see the U.S. Hit the regime. And let me ask the same question or a variant of it, which is one of the pushbacks or arguments that's trotted out against the U.S. taking action is that it would cause a rally around the flag effect and would make Iranian people suddenly rush to support the regime against the foreign intervention of the United States. So which of those is more likely here? Is it more likely that the Iranians would like to see some sort of action? Is it more likely that it would force them back to supporting the regime? What do you see as the effect of a U.S. strike?
Rally around the flag is a joke. I mean, it has always been a joke. I know that there has been a lot of people in DC, other, uh, Iran experts that, have argued it. It was never reality. And even now, with the level of rage and hatred that they have caused, when you are talking about 30,000, let's say, 30,000 of people being killed, they have been killed in a protest where other people were witnessing it. Every one of them, if let's say, I don't know, 10 people saw every one of them, just see how many people you are talking about. Every single one of them have family members, they a network of people, friends, family. You are talking about millions of people who have been directly affected during the past 3 weeks, and also it is a massive nationwide grief and tragedy that people are experiencing. So talking about rallying around the flag, like I said, has always been untrue, and even now is simply unrealistic. I mean, it's not going to happen. What we hear, the question, I mean, different people will have different answers to it. Yes, there are people who are against foreign intervention, but vast majority of people are watching the skies day and night. I was talking to somebody who is basically works in Bazaar, Iran's market, and he was saying that anything that we hear, everybody is just jumping out, looking at the sky, being basically happy that it is started. So I don't know if U.S. or Israel is going to hit anytime soon, but if it happens, at least now the momentum is there. People will support it, no doubt about it. And if it sustains, if it's just one-off attack, I have my doubts. But if it sustains for a few days, a week, I have zero doubt that people will come out. There is no question about it. I agree with what John said, but Israeli element is also there. Israel had an unfinished job in Iran. They know that President Trump is not going to be in the White House forever. So there is a window of opportunity, 2 years, 3 years. I don't think Israel is going to lose or miss this opportunity. I don't think President Trump, he keeps talking about deal, that Iran wants a deal. We know that there is no negotiation right now. And I will remind you of what was happening during the 2 months of negotiations before 12 days war. You would remember that President Trump kept saying that the negotiations are going very well, the deal is close, we are reaching a deal with Iran. It even made many people in DC, I know, some friends, Iran watchers, they were becoming nervous. They even wrote it publicly that, maybe there is another Obama type deal is coming. And we saw that it never happened. I mean, we had the 12 days war immediately after that 2 months ultimatum that they gave. On day 61, Israel hit Iran, and President Trump gave Iran 2 months for negotiations. Iran did not accept the terms that President Trump basically or the demands, putting aside Iran's nuclear program altogether, curbing missile program to 300 miles or 500 miles reach, I don't remember, and basically forgetting about proxies altogether. They did not accept it at that time, and they are not going to accept it now. That's for sure. Khamenei will not accept it. And I think when you have an irreconcilable enemy, Khamenei, as long as he is alive, he's not going to abandon Iran's nuclear program. He will never, ever abandon missile program, and he will never abandon proxies. That is for sure. It's not going to happen. And when there is an enemy, an irreconcilable enemy, the textbook answer is to eliminate it. So I would say maybe US or Israel may go for it. That will start an opening, because if Khamenei is out of the game, then that's a new opening. We will see what happens. Will the IRGC, other president, other influential people, will they make a different decision? I don't believe anything is going to change. I personally believe even if Khamenei is out of the game, nothing will change. However, I might be wrong. But I think if they, if President Trump or Israel is looking for a solution, that can be a new opening. And after that, we will see what happens. But generally speaking, I think Israel is also keen to see what is happening, and I don't think they will miss this opportunity. And I don't think President Trump himself will miss this opportunity, but we will see what happens.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. So maybe on that last point about Khomeini being gone won't necessarily change anything. We have our first question from General Chuck Wald asking, would the IRGC support a Pahlavi presidency? So I guess could you see a coup? Could you see a coup?
Coup happens when a military force wants to take power. They already have it. IRGC has everything. So a coup against, unless we believe that there will be a coup against Khamenei, for instance, which I don't think that there is a potential for it.
A second question is, what percentage of the Iranian adults today are sympathetic to the mullah-led regime?
We don't know. The participation or turnout in the most recent election, which was presidential election, was less than 40%. 60% of the people chose not to go to polling stations, basically. They did not cast the vote at the first round. And the level of the votes were so small that by law, no president could be announced as winner. So they had to go for a second round of the election. And again, the official figure was nearly 49%. So half of the population did not vote. I don't want to judge by that, because many people, they have to vote because if you are a student, you want that stamp in your, in your birth certificate to show that you have been, you cast your vote, because then it can be a problem if you are going to, university and other stuff. The number that I want to give you is an estimate, so I don't have hard evidence for it. But I would say less than 20%, and I'm becoming very, very cautious. I mean, one can easily say even less than 10, but I will say less than 20% really support Islamic Republic, and they are not ideological. Again, that this is important to understand, that Islamic Republic has lost its ideologic legitimacy. Those who are still supporting it have financial basically profit from it. It's not about ideology. And they can easily change their, because if you are supporting a regime for money, then, if somebody else is providing it, you will change side.
John, maybe I could end with you with one final question, which is another reason that's often given for the U.S. doing nothing, or the U.S. not pushing for the collapse of the Iranian regime, as JINSA has advocated, is that better to have the devil that that what could come next would be worse. Given how little support there is for the regime, as we just heard from Mehdi, is that a concern that we should have, that we could end up with something worse if and when the regime falls?
Well, I've been through enough of this that yes, it's probably possible to imagine things could get worse for a lot of our allies in the region. I mean, obviously, Turkey's worried about a mass refugee flow, a vacuum, a collapse, that there is no opposition, nobody like Reza or somebody else who can pick up the pieces, who can attract the security forces, that it doesn't lead to a civil war and hundreds of thousands of people dying there and spreading instability to the rest of the neighborhood. So, I mean, there's all kinds of nightmare scenarios, I suppose you can paint, but they're pretty extreme, and it's just hard to imagine, especially after this kind of slaughter, that things could get much worse. You can say it's a very weakened regime now from the perception of the United States, that our main interests are they don't have nuclear weapons, we curtail their missile force, and they're not spreading terror throughout the region. And they have a reduced capacity to do that now. But if you could press a button and get rid of the regime and have I am want somebody who does think it's useful thinking about the future of Iran and whether or not we can have more of a soft landing than a really, really hard landing that gets hundreds of thousands of people killed inside of Iran and spreading instability. So I do think it's worth thinking about that and building capabilities and assets with the Iranian people, which we should have been doing for the last several decades in terms of helping opposition and making sure that they would have fail-proof communications and ability to speak to each other, and empowering leaders within the Iranian opposition, and trying to lend some kind of coherence and support, as we did with Eastern Europe, obviously during the Cold War. And I just have a sense we've done a lot less of that. But no, if after seeing this kind of slaughter, it's hard to come up with those scenarios where it could be worse. If there was just a collapse of this regime, and it was replaced by an IRGC dictatorship that's also prepared to kill lots of people, and so lots of bad things could come out of this. I think it's up to the Iranian people ultimately to decide what their future is going to be. I do think this issue of Reza, and people who dismissed him for so many years, after seeing what he was able to mobilize, particularly on the 8th and 9th, and the chance for him that Mehdi has discussed. I think it really is, if we're thinking about having some kind of coherent opposition with a day after plan to help advance the interests of the Iranian people and the interests of the United States and the West, that it's worth our time reevaluating what our assumptions were about Reza Pahlavi and the kind of movement he might be able to create that could be a useful partner for the United States.
Thanks. Last question for you, Mehdi. What are you going to be watching for next in Iran? What are you keeping an eye on?
Everyone really, including me, is looking whether there will be some sort of intervention. That will be a game changer, of course. Again, it depends on what sort of, intervention, what scale it will have. But I think it can change many things, because, like I said, I think people will take part in that. People will be the boots on the ground, basically. And that can be a game changer. It's not going to be very, beautiful. Definitely it's going to be ugly, because, again, IRGC is not going to sit and look. We will have more bloodshed, but at the end of the day, that's the path that people has chosen. We see a lot of videos of the people who got killed, and now their family are releasing those video clips, messages to the families that they say, okay, we are going out. I might get killed, but I want you to understand that how much I love you. I'm doing this for for my country. So when people were going out, they knew that they might get killed. However, they did it. It's not that they were going out to the protest and they were thinking that nobody is going to confront them, or there will be no, shooting or massacre. People could see it. And despite that, they went out. Again, the funerals, this morning I was watching a video clip of a funeral. that they were basically laying the body inside the grave, and people were shouting that, wake up, let's continue the fight, wake up. This kind of defiance is there. So I really can see very hardly that if there is some sort of intervention, any bombing, IRGC bases, missile program and other stuff, people will sit inside their homes and watch. It's not going to be like the 12 Days War. In 12-Day War, people were shocked. People never saw anything like that before. And then there was a mixed messaging. You had President Trump saying, leave Tehran, and then people were hearing from Netanyahu that, they were expecting people to come out. So that sort of mixed message. And then President Trump said to the people of Tehran that evacuate, according to official figures of the Islamic Republic, 6 million people left city. So I mean that's massive, and it can tell you that how people do listen to the outside message. I said that the people answered the call of Reza Pahlavi, but in the meantime, no one should forget the impact of President Trump's messages when he was saying that, he said to people, go out, and also he warned the Islamic Republic that you shouldn't shoot, or you can't shoot people the way you did previously. So putting all this together, I really think that if there is some sort of intervention, that can be game changer, but we will see. If that does not happen, I think people right now are grieving. People are in a state of closure, if you like, because many people have been killed. People are still grieving, but that grievance doesn't mean that people are scared. And this is not my judgment. It is based on hundreds and thousands of video clips that are coming out from these funerals, and knowing the culture of some parts of the country, which I mentioned, the tribal, elements, I don't think that this is going to go anywhere. And again, looking at the trends that we have had, I mentioned it briefly that in the past 5 years, we had waves of protests. Every time it was crushed, and it returned even bigger. The ability of a political system to kill stops somewhere. They are not going to continue killing tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands. I mean, now they kill 20,000, 30,000. This cannot continue. I really can't see that any political system can continue with fear. They need some sort of legitimacy. You can't, you can, what they say, you can lean on a dagger, but you can't sit on it.
So just really quickly, Mehdi, on that last point that you were making about defiance, particularly in the provinces, we heard reports of armed resistance, particularly in the Kurdish areas of Iran. We also heard reports of some protesters, even in big cities, picking up some sort of weapons, clashing with security forces. What is the prospect for any sort of armed resistance going forward?
Traditionally, Kurdistan is a big potential. Without any doubt, there are organized groups for many years. For the past 4 decades, they have kept their abilities, and they are most of those armed group have continued their operation in Iraqi Kurdistan, but they can always come in. I mean, they can't do it now, but if again there is some sort of intervention, there is a potential. I have no information on it. I'm just saying that there is a potential. And as I said, in Luristan, Lurs are traditionally armed, so we can assume or anticipate that there will be resistance. And if the killing continues, again, you can safely assume that people are not going to sit and watch. When they resist, then those who have access to arms will use it.
All right. Well, Mehdi, John, thank you very much for your time today. Mehdi, thank you in particular for all the important reporting that Iran International is doing. clearly an issue of importance to the region, to the world, something we'll continue to focus on and look forward to having you back on a future webinar. So thank you both very much. Thank you to the audience and wishing everyone a good, and if you're in the DC area, warm weekend. All the best.
Thanks, Blaze. Thank you, Mehdi.
Thank you. Bye.